I never thought a spilled milkshake could expose the hollow core of my own carefully constructed empire. My name is Arthur Finch, and my name is synonymous with success in the financial world. Finch Enterprises, a titan built on aggressive mergers, shrewd investments, and an unwavering belief in meritocracy. I prided myself on precision, on order, on eliminating inefficiency wherever I found it. My life was a meticulously orchestrated symphony of power lunches at the most exclusive establishments, board meetings that shifted billions, and philanthropic galas where my presence alone added gravitas. The Ambassador Club, where this incident unfolded, was my sanctuary, a temple of hushed elegance and impeccable service, a place where the clamor of the outside world simply ceased to exist. Every mahogany surface gleamed under the soft, recessed lighting, reflecting the intricate crystal chandeliers above. The scent of aged leather and expensive scotch usually filled the air, a comforting aroma of old money and established power. But that evening, the usual symphony was rudely interrupted by a discordant clash of ceramic on polished marble, followed by a child's startled yelp. I had been mid-sentence, outlining the final points of a hostile takeover bid to Mr. Henderson, a man whose net worth rivaled a small nation's GDP. We were discussing leverage, the delicate art of applying pressure to achieve maximum yield, when the sound cut through the refined hum of conversation like a knife. My head snapped towards the disturbance. There, in the otherwise pristine dining room, was a scene I deemed utterly unacceptable. A young boy, no older than 7, stood frozen beside a table, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and shame. At his feet, a vibrant pink milkshake had exploded across the white linen tablecloth, splattering droplets onto the crisp trousers of a clearly irritated elderly woman and pooling dangerously close to a pristine antique rug. Beside him, a young waitress, no older than 30, knelt, her face a mask of practiced calm that barely concealed a flicker of panic. Her uniform, usually immaculate, now bore a few telltale streaks of strawberry. She was desperately trying to mop up the sticky mess with a handful of napkins, her movements quick, almost frantic. The boy, Leo, as I later learned, clutched a worn teddy bear, his knuckles white. He looked utterly overwhelmed, a small, fragile boat, tossed in a sudden, unexpected storm. The silence that followed his initial cry was heavy, laden with judgment from the other diners, whose carefully cultivated indifference had cracked to reveal expressions ranging from mild annoyance to outright disgust. My own blood began to simmer. This was the Ambassador Club, not a Chuck E. Cheese. Children, especially unsupervised and clumsy ones, were an anomaly here. I cleared my throat, a sound that in any other circumstance would have been barely perceptible, but now resonated with a subtle yet undeniable authority. "Excuse me," I said, my voice cutting through the hushed murmurs, "but is there an issue here?" My tone was not a question, but a challenge. The waitress, Eleanor, rose slowly, her eyes meeting mine for a brief, defiant moment before dropping to the floor. "I apologize, Mr. Finch," she began, her voice low, laced with exhaustion. "It was an accident. Leo he got excited." "Excited," I retorted, my patience wearing thin. "This is an establishment of decorum, not a playground. His excitement has just ruined a table setting, stained a patron, and disrupted the entire atmosphere." The elderly woman, Mrs. Albright, huffed, dabbing at her trousers with a napkin. "The boy is completely out of control. His mother should be teaching him better manners." That was all the confirmation I needed. My gaze swept over Elena, taking in her slightly frazzled hair, the smudges under her eyes, the faint tremor in her hands as she struggled with the spilled drink. I saw not a mother in a difficult situation, but an individual who clearly lacked control, discipline, and the fundamental understanding of how to function in a civilized society, and it infuriated me. I believed in personal responsibility above all else. Success wasn't given. It was earned through relentless effort and unwavering self-control. This scene was a testament to the opposite. "You see, madam," I declared, my voice now firm, resonating with the conviction of absolute truth, "this is precisely the problem. You don't know how to raise that boy. You're enabling his lack of discipline. This kind of behavior is simply unacceptable." My words hung in the air, sharp and unyielding, designed to cut through any excuse, any plea for understanding. The silence that followed was absolute. Elena flinched, her composure finally cracking as a faint flush crept up her neck. Leo, sensing the gravity of the situation, buried his face deeper into his teddy bear, a small whimper escaping his lips. Mr. Henderson, usually unflappable, shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his eyes avoiding mine. Even he, a man who had faced down corporate raiders without batting an eye, seemed uneasy with the raw power of my condemnation. But I felt no remorse. I felt righteous. I was speaking an inconvenient truth that others were too polite, too afraid to voice. Someone needed to instill order, to call out laxity, and tonight that someone was me. I truly believed I was doing a service, upholding the standards of the club, perhaps even giving Elena a harsh but necessary dose of reality. My father, a man whose stern gaze could curdle milk, had taught me that softness was weakness and weakness was failure. This woman, this boy, they embodied a kind of chaotic inefficiency I simply could not tolerate. I watched as Elena finally managed to wipe up the bulk of the milkshake, her face pale, her lips pressed into a thin line. She didn't look at me, didn't offer another apology, just a quiet, determined effort to clean up the mess. And that, in my mind, was just another sign of her inadequacy. No real accountability, no sincere regret, just rote cleanup. If this opening already made you rethink what you knew, imagine what's coming next. So go ahead, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel, because here every video reveals something few dare to show. My pronouncement, delivered with the full weight of my executive authority and the implicit power of my financial standing, had the desired effect. The other diners, previously whispering in polite indignation, now looked away, some clearing their throats, others burying their faces in their menus. It was a victory, I told myself, a necessary assertion of standards. But as Elena led the small boy, Leo, away from the scene of the crime, their shoulders slumped in a posture of defeat, a strange, fleeting flicker of something akin to unease brushed against the edges of my conviction. I immediately dismissed it. Sentimentality was a luxury I could not afford, certainly not when addressing issues of discipline and personal responsibility. My father had instilled in me, from a very young age, the absolute necessity of maintaining an unyielding front. "Arthur!" he'd often bellow, his voice echoing through the cavernous halls of our Fifth Avenue mansion. "The world respects strength, not tears. Sentiment is for the weak. You must be iron." His words were not just advice, they were doctrine, carved into the very architecture of my being. I remembered one specific incident, a vivid, almost tactile memory that had shaped my perspective more profoundly than any other. I must have been 10 years old, a small, earnest boy with an insatiable curiosity about the intricate mechanisms of the world. My father, Harrison Finch, had brought me to his office for the first time, a grand affair on the top floor of the old Finch Tower overlooking Central Park. The air was thick with the scent of cigars and ambition. He had introduced me to his associates, each handshake a test of fortitude, each glance a measure of potential. Later, left alone in his vast office while he took a crucial call, I had accidentally knocked over a heavy bronze desk clock, a family heirloom, sending it crashing to the plush Persian rug. The sound was deafening in the sudden silence of the room. I froze, my small heart hammering against my ribs, convinced I had shattered something irreplaceable. My father emerged from his private line, his face a thundercloud. He didn't yell, his anger was far more chilling. He simply picked up the clock, examining the dented casing, then turned his icy gaze on me. "Clumsy, careless. That, Arthur, is how fortunes are lost. through a lack of attention, a lack of control. You must always be in control. He didn't punish me physically, but the weight of his disapproval, the silent, crushing judgment, was far worse. It taught me that mistakes, especially those born of carelessness, were unforgivable in his eyes. He didn't ask why. I'd been near the clock, didn't consider the curiosity of a child. He saw only the outcome: damage, a break in order, a lack of control. This memory now surfaced, unbidden, as I watched Elena and Leo disappear into the kitchen. My father's words resonated: lack of control. It solidified my stance. What I had witnessed at the table was precisely that: a failure to instill order, a failure to demonstrate control over one's progeny. How could anyone succeed in the cutthroat world I inhabited if they couldn't even manage a 7-year-old in a public setting? It was unfathomable. Later that evening, after Mr. Henderson had departed, still looking faintly uncomfortable, I summoned Michael, the club manager. Michael was a tall, impeccably dressed man whose perpetual deferential posture belied a sharp mind and an encyclopedic knowledge of the club's operations and its members' preferences. He knew my expectations implicitly. "Michael," I began, my voice low but firm, as he stood before my table, his hands clasped behind his back. "I believe we have a staffing issue." Michael's expression remained neutral, but I could see the subtle tightening around his eyes. He knew. "Mr. Finch," he prompted, his voice carefully modulated, "the waitress, Elena, and her son. This incident tonight was disruptive, highly unprofessional. It reflects poorly on the club's standards. My standards." I leaned back, steepled my fingers, and met his gaze directly. "I understand she's been here for some time, but frankly, her performance tonight was unacceptable. The boy was an absolute menace. Where was his other parent? Why was he even here?" Michael hesitated, a brief, almost imperceptible pause. "Mr. Finch, Elena is a dedicated employee. Her son, he's often here after school. She doesn't have other childcare options. His father is out of the picture. And Leo, he has some special needs. He's on the autism spectrum, sir. Sometimes he struggles with unexpected stimuli or changes in routine." My brow furrowed. Autism spectrum. This was new information, certainly, but did it excuse the behavior? Did it excuse the disruption? In my mind, it presented another challenge, another factor that should have been managed, controlled, or mitigated. It didn't negate the fundamental responsibility. Special needs or not, Michael, this is the Ambassador Club. Not a daycare for children who can't handle a spoon. Her personal circumstances, while perhaps unfortunate, do not excuse a breach of professional conduct. It's a matter of upholding the club's reputation, and mine. I felt a familiar surge of conviction, the unshakable belief in my own rightness. You just heard a glimpse into my past, the stern teachings of my father. Now I have to ask you, have you ever been so convinced of your own rightness that you dismissed crucial details about someone else's struggle? Comment below if this detail about Leo's autism spectrum surprised you, and what your initial thoughts were. Michael shifted uncomfortably, his gaze flickering from my face to the perfectly polished silverware on the table. He was trapped between my unyielding demand and his loyalty to a long-serving employee. The scent of roasted duck from the kitchen wafted faintly into the dining area, usually a comforting aroma, but tonight it felt almost suffocating, heavy with the unspoken tension. I watched him, impassive, waiting for his response. My father had taught me that silence was a powerful weapon in negotiations, forcing the other party to reveal their hand. "Mr. Finch," Michael finally said, his voice softer, almost pleading. "Elena is a single mother. She takes extra shifts to make ends meet. She's one of our most reliable staff members, always picks up the slack. If she loses this job, she'll lose everything, and finding care for Leo, with his particular needs on her salary, it's nearly impossible." He paused, perhaps hoping his appeal to my humanity would soften my resolve. It did not. It only strengthened my conviction that she lacked foresight and proper planning. My father's shadow stretched long, even across the years and the distance of his grave. He would have scoffed at Michael's sentimentality. "Excuses, Arthur," his phantom voice echoed in my mind. "Excuses are the currency of the weak. A true leader finds solutions, not justifications for failure." I recalled a particularly brutal lesson from my adolescence. I had brought home a B+ on a history exam, a grade I felt was respectable, even commendable, given the notoriously difficult professor. My father, however, saw it as a profound disappointment. "A B+, he had thundered, his face contorted in a mask of controlled fury. "That's not excellent, Arthur. That's merely adequate. Adequate is another word for mediocre. And mediocrity, my boy, is a disease. You were given the finest education, the finest tutors. There is no excuse for anything less than perfection. None." He had then proceeded to assign me an additional 100-page report on the very subject I'd supposedly mastered, to be completed over the weekend, thereby cancelling my planned trip with friends. The sting of that unfairness, that absolute refusal to acknowledge effort over outcome, had been profound. Yet it had also been incredibly effective. I had never settled for anything less than excellence again. The relentless pursuit of perfection had become my mantra, my driving force. And now I saw Elena as a manifestation of that adequate existence. A single mother, struggling, yes, but also failing to manage her circumstances to meet the high standards I demanded of myself and everyone in my orbit. "Michael," I stated, my voice devoid of emotion, "I appreciate your loyalty to your staff. But loyalty does not override performance. This incident was public. It was witnessed by Mr. Henderson, Mrs. Albright, and others. The club's image is paramount. Her employment is no longer tenable. I expect her to be transitioned out, quietly, by the end of the week." I watched as a flicker of dismay, almost despair, crossed Michael's face. He knew arguing with me was futile. My word was law, especially within the confines of establishments where I was a significant shareholder, like the Ambassador Club. "Understood, Mr. Finch," he finally conceded, his shoulders slumping slightly. "I'll handle it." He turned and walked away, his footsteps surprisingly heavy on the plush carpet. I felt a fleeting sense of, not triumph, but certainly satisfaction. Order had been restored. A problem had been identified and swiftly dealt with. It was efficient. It was decisive. It was how I operated. I had excised the inefficiency, the disruption. I had ensured the Ambassador Club's pristine facade remained unblemished. I believed truly that I had resolved the situation, that I had upheld standards, and that this unpleasantness was now firmly in my rearview mirror. The next few days were business as usual. Billion-dollar deals were brokered. New strategies for market domination were finalized. The Ambassador Club returned to its accustomed quiet hum of sophisticated conversation and clinking crystal. I saw Michael, who now seemed a little more subdued, a little more worn around the edges, but he confirmed Elena had been transitioned out as per my directive. A new, equally efficient but less personally invested waitress now served my usual table, her movements precise, her smile practiced but empty. I felt a surge of fleeting victory. My decision had been sound. I had, in my own estimation, done what was necessary. The world, in my perception, was a chessboard, and I was merely moving the pieces to ensure maximum advantage and maintain absolute order. The lingering scent of the strawberry milkshake, the fear in Leo's eyes, Eleanor's quiet dignity, they faded into the background noise of my triumphs, becoming nothing more than minor inconsequential details in the grand tapestry of my success. The world moved on, and so did I. My solution, though harsh, had been effective, or so I believed. This decision felt justified to me at the time, a necessary step to maintain order. But I wonder, looking back, how many of us, caught in our own narratives of success and efficiency, miss the human cost of our actions. If you've ever felt the sting of a decision made from a position of power that overlooked personal struggles, share your thoughts in the comments below. My focus quickly shifted to more pressing matters: a potential hostile takeover of a rival tech firm, the delicate dance of negotiations, the strategic maneuvering required to ensure Finch Enterprises remained several steps ahead of its competitors. The incident at the Ambassador Club with Elena and her son Leo receded into the periphery of my consciousness, a minor blip quickly overshadowed by the gravitational pull of billions. I felt a sense of vindication, a quiet reaffirmation of my decision-making process. I had identified a problem, addressed it decisively, and moved on. That was the Finch way. That was the path to unwavering success. The faint uneasiness that had pricked at me initially was now completely suppressed, replaced by the familiar thrum of accomplishment. Life, in my world, was about constant forward momentum, an inexorable march towards greater influence and control. Yet life has a peculiar way of serving up unexpected detours, of pulling at the loose threads of our most rigid convictions. A few weeks after Elena's departure, a seemingly insignificant event occurred. I was clearing out some old documents from my father's study, a room I had largely left untouched since his passing years ago. It was a dark, cavernous space, filled with the ghosts of his ambition and the lingering scent of stale pipe tobacco. Dust motes danced in the slivers of sunlight that pierced through the heavy velvet drapes, illuminating shelves filled with leather-bound tomes and financial ledgers. I was searching for an old deed, a forgotten piece of property that had recently resurfaced in a legal dispute, something completely unrelated to the Ambassador Club. Deep within a mahogany desk drawer, beneath layers of outdated stock reports and correspondence, my fingers brushed against a thin, aged envelope. It was yellowed with time, the paper brittle at the edges. There was no name on the front, just a faded, almost illegible postmark from a small town in upstate New York, dated nearly 30 years ago. Curiosity, a rare and often unwelcome guest in my meticulously ordered mind, compelled me to open it. Inside, there wasn't a letter, but a single creased photograph. It was a black-and-white image, faded but still remarkably clear. It depicted a young woman, perhaps in her early 20s, with a warm, open smile and kind eyes, holding a baby. She looked familiar, eerily so. Beside her, a man stood with a somewhat awkward, almost shy smile, his arm tentatively around her shoulder. And then my gaze sharpened. The man in the photograph, younger, less burdened by the stern lines of age and ambition, was undeniably my father, Harrison Finch. My breath caught in my throat. This was not my mother. My mother, Eleanor, had always been a woman of refined elegance, never one for simple dresses and open, uninhibited smiles. This woman was different, radiating a quiet strength, a gentle spirit that was utterly foreign to the world my father inhabited, and by extension, the world he had created for me. On the back of the photograph, in delicate, looping script that was starkly different from my father's bold, angular handwriting, was a brief, almost poetic inscription. To Harrison, always remembered. Mary, hope our little Leo finds his way. The name Mary sparked a vague, distant memory from my childhood, a name my mother had once spat with venom, quickly silenced by my father's sharp glance. A mistake, she had called her. A regrettable detour. But the name Leo, the same name as the boy in the Ambassador Club, a cold, sharp shiver ran down my spine, despite the relative warmth of the study. Could it be a coincidence? The world, I had always believed, operated on logic, on predictable patterns, not on such unlikely alignments. Yet the familiarity of the woman's face, the unexpected presence of my father in such an informal, intimate setting, and that name, Leo, It clawed at the edges of my carefully constructed certainty. My mind, usually so adept at compartmentalizing, at dismissing irrelevant data, now struggled to process this anomaly. This photograph, this cryptic inscription, it introduced an element of chaos, a narrative thread that simply did not fit into the established history of my formidable family. My father, a paragon of moral rectitude, a man who preached control and order above all else, secretly involved with another woman, having a child named Leo. It was preposterous. It defied everything I thought I knew about him, everything he had taught me to believe in. But the evidence was staring me in the face, undeniable in its quiet existence. I clutched the photograph, my fingers tracing the faded edges, a whirlwind of disbelief and a nascent sense of betrayal churning within me. This wasn't just some forgotten relic. It felt like a silent accusation, a secret that had been deliberately buried, one that now threatened to destabilize the very foundations of my identity. My father, the architect of my rigid worldview, the man who scorned weakness and preached unwavering rectitude, was hiding a profound truth. Just when you think you know someone, a hidden truth emerges that shatters everything. This photograph was more than just an image. It was a crack in the foundation of my entire world. Have you ever stumbled upon a secret that completely altered your perception of someone you thought you knew intimately? Tell me your stories of unexpected revelations in the comments below. The photograph, small and innocuous as it was, felt like a thunderclap in the quiet sanctity of my father's study. My initial disbelief slowly gave way to a chilling, creeping dread. It was as if the meticulously crafted narrative of my family, the one I had internalized and lived by, was suddenly dissolving before my eyes. My father, the formidable Harrison Finch, a man whose public persona was as unblemished as a freshly polished diamond, the pillar of the community, the stern patriarch who demanded absolute adherence to moral codes. Could he have maintained such a profound secret? And why? What did Mary and our little Leo truly signify? The questions swirled, relentless, gnawing at the edges of my composure. I stared at the photo, trying to reconcile the smiling, softer version of my father with the unyielding titan I knew. The man in the picture held a vulnerability, a tenderness that had been utterly absent in the father who raised me. The contrast was stark, almost painful. I tried to dismiss it, to rationalize it as some distant cousin, a misunderstanding, a youthful indiscretion long past. But the name Leo stubbornly persisted in my mind, a tiny, insistent echo. And Mary, there was a name that had been spoken only in whispers, if at all, in my childhood home. It was like a splinter in my consciousness, digging deeper with every passing moment. My analytical mind, trained to connect disparate pieces of information, began to work against my desire for denial. I pulled out my father's old business directories, then a phone book from the period mentioned on the photo's postmark. I searched for Mary in upstate New York, a needle in a haystack, yet compelled by an unseen force. Days turned into nights. My usual meticulous work schedule suffered, my thoughts fragmented, constantly returning to that photograph and the unsettling implications it carried. My assistant, Sarah, usually accustomed to my laser focus, noticed my distraction, casting concerned glances my way, though she wisely said nothing. My research was slow, painstaking, and initially yielded nothing concrete. But then, a seemingly random event sparked a new lead. I was at a charity auction, a mundane social obligation, when I overheard a conversation between two elderly benefactors. "Remember Mary Evans?" one said, a wistful note in her voice. "From Oakhaven? Such a bright spirit. She had a son, Leo. A beautiful boy, but with challenges. She worked so hard for him. Eventually moved downstate, I heard, for better medical care and opportunities for Leo. Oakhaven, the small town on the postmark. The puzzle pieces, once scattered and seemingly unrelated, began to click into place with a horrifying precision. Mary Evans, a son named Leo, special needs, moved downstate. It was a faint thread, yet it vibrated with an electric charge that jolted me to my core. Downstate, New York City, the Ambassador Club, Elena, Leo. My heart began to pound a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I immediately tasked a discreet private investigator with finding any records related to Mary Evans and her son Leo, particularly any connections to Harrison Finch. The investigator, a shrewd man named Miller, was accustomed to my urgent, often obscure requests, but even he seemed surprised by the intensity in my eyes. The waiting period was excruciating. Every phone call, every email notification sent a jolt of anxious anticipation through me. The world outside, the bustling city, the clamor of the financial markets, all seemed to fade into a meaningless hum. My entire reality had become hinged on this one devastating truth that was slowly, inexorably coming into focus. Then came Miller's call, precise and clipped. "Mr. Finch, I found her. Mary Evans, passed away 5 years ago. Cancer. Her son Leo Evans was placed in the care of his aunt, Elena Petrova. She's been his legal guardian ever since." He paused, then added, "Petrova, sir. That's her maiden name. Her mother's maiden name, Mary Evans, was adopted by Mary after she left Oakhaven. Elena Petrova is Mary Evans's younger sister." The phone felt heavy in my hand, as if it had suddenly absorbed all the weight of my past, my father's secrets, and my own damning actions. Elena Petrova, the waitress. The woman I had publicly humiliated. The woman whose job I had personally ensured she lost. The woman whose son, Leo, I had condemned as undisciplined, chaotic. And now, the horrifying realization crashed over me like a tsunami. The Leo I had disparaged was my half-brother. Elena, the woman I had dismissed with such callous indifference, was his aunt, Mary's sister. My half-brother, a child with autism, entrusted to the care of his aunt, who was struggling to make ends meet, working long hours as a waitress, bringing him to work because she had no other option. My father, Harrison Finch, the man who had instilled in me the value of honor and integrity, had abandoned Mary and their son, Leo, my brother, to a life of quiet struggle while he continued to amass his vast fortune, showering me with every privilege imaginable. The irony, the sheer, crushing weight of it, was unbearable. My father, the paragon of control, had been living a double life, and I, Arthur Finch, the staunch upholder of standards, the judge of all things disorderly, had just summarily ruined the life of my own flesh and blood, my half-brother's primary caregiver. The world, which I had always seen as a logical, predictable machine, suddenly felt like a cruel, twisted joke. The cold, sterile satisfaction I had felt in resolving the Ambassador Club incident evaporated, replaced by a searing wave of guilt and a profound sense of betrayal. My father had lied. His entire legacy, the very foundation of my upbringing, was built on a lie. And in my blind adherence to his teachings, his rigid definition of success and order, I had become an unwitting accomplice, a tool in perpetuating his injustice. The truth had not just come to light. It had exploded, shattering my reality into a million sharp, unforgiving fragments. This was the moment my world truly inverted. The roles of victim and perpetrator blurred, and I found myself staring into the abyss of my own ignorance and arrogance. What's the most shocking family secret you've ever uncovered, and how did it change your view of those involved? Share your stories of revelation in the comments. The revelation of Leo being my half-brother, and Elena, the waitress I had so casually dismissed, his dedicated aunt, hit me with the force of a physical blow. The air in my office, usually crisp and controlled, suddenly felt thick, suffocating. My mind reeled, trying to reconcile the image of my stern, unyielding father with the man who had evidently fathered a child outside of his marriage, then seemingly abandoned them to a life of struggle. Every lecture, every sermon about integrity, responsibility, and the unforgivable sin of weakness now rang hollow, a grotesque mockery of the truth. He had built his empire on a foundation of lies, and I, his dutiful son, had unwittingly become an enforcer of those lies, inflicting pain on my own family without even knowing it. The guilt was a physical ache, a knot tightening in my chest, making it hard to breathe. I remembered Leo's frightened eyes, Elena's quiet dignity, and my own scathing words. "You don't know how to raise that boy." Oh, the exquisite, agonizing irony. I, who knew nothing of the boy, nothing of his true struggle or the immense sacrifice of the woman caring for him, had presumed to judge. My memory, usually so sharp and precise, began to replay the scene at the Ambassador Club in excruciating detail. I saw Eleanor, her face pale but composed, diligently cleaning up the spilled milkshake. I saw Leo, small and overwhelmed, clutching his teddy bear, his fear palpable. My own voice, harsh and authoritative, echoing through the elegant dining room, seemed monstrous now, amplified by the fresh understanding of their vulnerability. I had not just been rude, I had been cruel. I had not just dismissed an employee, I had undermined the lifeline of my own brother's caregiver. My father's values, which I had blindly adopted and championed, now felt like a gilded cage, trapping me in a cycle of judgment and emotional isolation. The solitude of my success, a theme I had once considered a badge of honor, now felt like a desolate wasteland. I spent the next few days in a haze, the normally vibrant pulse of the city outside my penthouse window seeming muted, distant. Deals, acquisitions, market trends, they all seemed utterly meaningless compared to the profound human cost of my own arrogance. I cancelled meetings, ignored calls from my board, and retreated into a self-imposed exile, surrounded by the opulent silence of my success. The grand artworks on my walls, the bespoke furniture, the panoramic view of the Manhattan skyline, all the trappings of my achievements now mocked me, monuments to a life built on a distorted truth. I wrestled with my pride, a formidable opponent that had been honed and strengthened over decades. The idea of admitting my mistake, of confronting Elena, of acknowledging my half-brother, was terrifying. It meant dismantling the carefully constructed persona of Arthur Finch, the infallible magnate. It meant facing the consequences of my father's lies, and perhaps even more dauntingly, the consequences of my own unexamined convictions. The hidden theme of solitude behind success, a silent undercurrent in my life, suddenly surged to the forefront. I had achieved everything my father had ever desired for me: immense wealth, unparalleled power, respect, or perhaps fear, in the business world. But looking out at the city lights, each one a distant star, I felt profoundly, terrifyingly alone. My relationships were transactional, built on power dynamics and mutual gain. My personal life was a barren landscape. My father's pursuit of wealth had cost him his integrity, and indirectly had cost me the chance to know my own family. And my own pursuit had cost me my empathy, my connection to the very humanity I had so blithely judged. It's truly humbling, isn't it, when your entire perspective flips and you realize the assumptions you built your world on were completely false? You ever realize the world you built on assumptions was crumbling around you? What would you do when your entire perception of someone flips on its head? Share your most profound moments of self-realization in the comments. The weight of my own actions, compounded by the shocking revelation of my father's hidden life, pressed down on me with an almost physical force. The penthouse, once a symbol of my triumph, now felt like a gilded prison. Every object, every carefully curated piece of art, seemed to mock me with its silent grandeur, reflecting the hollowness within. My mind, usually sharp and decisive, was a battlefield of conflicting emotions: shame, regret, anger at my father, and a deep, gnawing fear of confronting the truth and its consequences. The choice before me was stark, a profound moral dilemma that dwarfed any corporate acquisition I had ever faced. I could maintain my silence, bury the secret, and perhaps offer Elena and Leo anonymous financial assistance, thereby preserving my meticulously crafted public image. Or I could confront the truth, expose my father's hypocrisy, admit my own egregious error, and seek forgiveness from the very people I had wronged. The former path, that of discreet atonement and continued deception, was tempting. It was the path of least resistance, the one that preserved my power, my pride. It was the path my father would undoubtedly have chosen. I could set up a trust, ensure Leo's future, secure Elena's livelihood, all from a distance, without ever having to utter a single word of apology, without ever having to face the pain in their eyes. The thought was a salve to my wounded ego, a way to mend the damage without tearing down the facade of Arthur Finch. But even as I considered it, a wave of profound self-disgust washed over me. It felt like another lie, another perpetuation of the very cycle of abandonment and emotional distance that had led to this catastrophe. To avoid accountability now would be to fully embody the morally bankrupt man I was rapidly discovering my father to be. And that was a fate I suddenly desperately wanted to avoid. The alternative, however, was terrifying. It meant dismantling my entire identity, facing public scrutiny, enduring the judgment of a world that revered me for my strength, not my vulnerability. It meant admitting weakness, admitting fault. It meant having to look Elena in the eye, the woman whose dignity I had so cruelly trampled, and confess my ignorance, my arrogance, my utter lack of humanity. It meant acknowledging Leo, my half-brother, a boy I had dismissed as a disruptive inconvenience, as family. This choice was not logical. It was purely emotional, a wrenching battle between pride and conscience, between the legacy of power and the desperate need for redemption. The silence in the penthouse was broken only by the frantic hammering of my own heart. I walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows, gazing out at the endless sprawl of New York City, a city that celebrated titans like me, but often overlooked the quiet struggles unfolding in its shadows. The fragile relationships of human connection, the very fabric of empathy, had been sacrificed on the altar of my ambition and my father's secrets. I remembered my father's last words to me, whispered on his deathbed, his voice thin and reedy. "Keep the name, Arthur. Keep the name strong. That's all that matters." He hadn't spoken of love, of family, of kindness, only of legacy, of reputation, of an unyielding facade. In that moment, looking out at the glittering, indifferent city, I understood the profound tragedy of his life and the terrifying prospect of repeating it. The price of redemption, I realized, was not measured in dollars, but in the willingness to shatter one's own carefully constructed reality, to embrace vulnerability, and to accept the humbling weight of one's own humanity. This was the true climax of my life, not some hostile takeover or a record-breaking IPO. This was the moment I had to choose: remain the ruthless, detached magnate, or embark on the arduous, uncertain path of becoming a man capable of genuine empathy and remorse. The choice was clear, yet the fear was paralyzing. I had to face Eleanor. I had to face Leo. And most importantly, I had to face myself. I picked up my phone, my hand trembling slightly as I scrolled through my contacts. I found Michael's number, the club manager I had forced into making an impossible decision. He was the first bridge I had to cross, the first step on this agonizing path. I pressed call, the sound of the dial tone echoing loudly in the vast, silent room. It was a terrifying, exhilarating moment, a confession, a renunciation of a lifetime of pride, a desperate plea for a chance at something real. My chest tightened, a burning sensation spreading through me. There was no going back now. The choice was made. The path, though uncertain and fraught with potential public humiliation, was the only one that offered a semblance of peace, a glimmer of light in the profound darkness of my self-discovery. The fragile relations of human connection, once so easily discarded, now felt like the only thing worth pursuing. The phone call to Michael was difficult, punctuated by my own stammering admissions and his stunned silence. He listened patiently as I stumbled through an explanation, my voice uncharacteristically uncertain, outlining the devastating truth about my father and my half-brother Leo. His response was quiet, measured, devoid of judgment, but heavy with unspoken understanding. He gave me Elena's new address, a modest apartment in a less affluent part of Queens, and warned me that she was fiercely proud and likely still deeply hurt. His words were a necessary cold shower, bracing me for the difficult confrontation ahead. I ended the call, feeling both terrified and a strange, fragile sense of liberation. The first crack in my fortress of pride had been made. The next morning, I drove through the bustling, cacophonous streets of Queens, a world away from the pristine silence of my usual Manhattan commute. The air was thick with the scent of street food and exhaust fumes, the sidewalks teeming with people of every conceivable background, rushing past bodegas and laundromats. This was a world I rarely saw, a world that Elena and Leo navigated every single day, a world where the struggles were visible, raw, and undeniable. I found the apartment building, a brick structure with peeling paint and a worn stoop. My stomach churned with a mixture of apprehension and genuine remorse. I took a deep breath, walked up the steps, and knocked on the door. After a moment, it opened a crack, revealing Elena's face. Her eyes, usually tired but resolute, widened slightly in surprise, then narrowed with a flicker of suspicion and a hint of the deep hurt I had inflicted. She was holding a dishcloth, her hands still damp. "Mr. Finch," she said, her voice flat, devoid of the deference she once showed. It wasn't a question, but a statement of unwelcome recognition. "What are you doing here?" I swallowed, my throat suddenly dry. The carefully prepared speech I had rehearsed in my head evaporated, replaced by a raw, unscripted surge of emotion. "Elena," I began, my voice hoarse, I need to apologize. Profoundly. I've made a terrible mistake, a cruel mistake." Her eyes remained cold, unyielding. "An apology won't get my job back, Mr. Finch, or fix the stress you put me and Leo through." "I know," I admitted, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "And I'm not here to offer you money as a simple fix. Though I intend to make amends financially, that's not why I came. I came because I discovered something about my father, about Leo." Her expression shifted, a flicker of curiosity momentarily replacing her anger. I recounted the story, haltingly at first, then with increasing urgency, of the photograph of Mary Evans, of the private investigator's findings. I told her about Harrison Finch, her sister, and the devastating realization that Leo was my half-brother. Elena listened in stunned silence, her face growing paler with each revelation, her grip on the dishcloth tightening until her knuckles were white. When I finished, the silence stretched, heavy and profound. The air vibrated with the weight of decades of buried secrets, of injustice, and of newly unveiled family ties. Tears welled in her eyes, not of sadness but of a fierce, protective anger. "My father was a good man, Mr. Finch," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "He loved Mary. He wasn't strong enough to stand up to your father, to his wealth and influence. He was threatened. He told Mary he had no choice but to leave, but he always sent letters, money, until he disappeared completely. We thought he just abandoned us completely after a while. My father, I realized, had not only abandoned Mary and Leo, but had also orchestrated the disappearance of Leo's other father, erasing him from their lives. The layers of his cruelty were deeper than I could have imagined. Then, from behind Elena, a small figure appeared. Leo, his eyes still wide, clutching his teddy bear, peered out at me with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. His presence was the final, devastating blow to my pride. I knelt down, bringing myself to his eye level, my heart aching with a regret so profound it felt like a physical wound. "Leo," I said, my voice barely a whisper, "I am so sorry for what I said that night. I was wrong. terribly wrong. He looked at me, then at Elena, then back at me, his face unreadable. He didn't offer a hug, didn't smile, just a small, almost imperceptible nod. It was enough. It was a fragile beginning. My attempt at justice unfolded over the next few months. I reinstated Elena at the Ambassador Club, ensuring she received a promotion and a significant pay raise, and established a generous trust for Leo's education and ongoing care, ensuring his future was secure. I publicly acknowledged Leo as my half-brother, a move that sent shockwaves through the New York financial world, sparking headlines and speculation about Harrison Finch's hidden life. It cost me some standing, some reputation among the old guard who valued discretion above all else. But the immense emotional loss of my own detached existence was slowly, painfully, being replaced by something akin to genuine human connection. The club, once a symbol of my rigid control, slowly became a place of unexpected healing, a space where I sometimes saw Elena and Leo, no longer with fear or resentment in their eyes, but with a quiet understanding, a hesitant glimmer of forgiveness. The fortune was still mine, but the quiet dignity in her eyes and the hesitant nod of a boy who was now my brother taught me a lesson money could never truly buy. The journey of redemption was far from over, but for the first time in my life, I felt like I was truly earning something, and if, in the end, the poor boy with the spilled milkshake could bring down the walls of a billionaire's heart, then perhaps he was the true magnate all along. If this content opened your mind, comment below, "I made it to the end." This helps me understand who truly seeks knowledge beyond the surface. Like the video, subscribe to the channel now and hit that notification bell, because the next episodes will go even deeper. And don't leave without clicking on the next video. It's the continuation of this journey.